All right, hello everyone. This is Ari M. Wolfe, and this class is about Saturn. We're at the very beginning of a very important transitional point in the Saturn journey. And really, anytime that we look at Saturn, we're looking at the foundation of growth. In this incarnation, there's really no growth, there's no evolution that can be integrated and made applicable in our own lives. And whenever we speak about Saturn in our natal chart or in transit, we're speaking about our alignment. How are we embodying ourselves here in these bodies, in this human experience, in community and family and everything? How are we embodying ourselves with respect to our soul's purpose? And within Saturn, we develop wisdom and insight and understanding into how to live here in a good way. And when I say a good way, it's not an ethical or external moral standard, but there's a wisdom of knowing the boundaries and the limitations and the parameters of our own lives, living with respect to the natural boundaries of existence. And when we think of Saturn, we're always talking about boundaries and limitations. But just to envision for a moment that everything in existence has a boundary. If it's a thing, it has a boundary. If it's a non-thing, it has no boundaries. Only not thing is boundaryless. But everything else, which is everything, meaning a thing, has boundary. And so Saturn is that which is defined. If you can name it, touch it, form it, whatever, it's a thing. And it has parameters to it. And the nature of everything is to be understood for what it is. And on the level of consciousness, consciousness itself has its own, it manifests within parameters and boundaries and limitations. Consciousness is, of course, not defined by any limitation. But when we look at each one of us, our own individual karmic reality is very much determined by the conditioning of our own interior consciousness. So if when I was a child, I was slapped on the hand when I made a mistake, it's going to be imprinted in my consciousness that doing certain things are wrong or bad, or if I do certain things, I'll be punished. And it may not be rational. In fact, nothing is really rational. But my consciousness will be formed in a certain way. And so with Saturn, we project and create a reality in our mind that reflect how our own interior consciousness has been formed and conditioned in a very particular way. And then what happens is we get into a relationship, we walk this journey, and we find all the ways in which our conditioning doesn't seem to work very well. Coming back to the word alignment, that often we find our existing conditioning, the parameters of our life, and the world that we've created doesn't really work well for maintaining wellness and health and a real sense of being on point with our soul's purpose, with who we really are here to be. And this is one of the pieces within Saturn. We can become so incredibly conditioned by an external measure of value. What we've learned is meaningful. We've learned is valuable and important, and what it looks aligned, how you dress, how you act, a certain relationship that looks a certain way, certain social or financial status, the idea of status in general. But internally, are we actually enslaved? Are we actually free? In the tarot cosmology, and I'll show you a picture a little later, there's the picture of the devil card. And the devil card has this really beautiful image. Actually, I'll show you now. Where you have two people chained up by this big, scary devil dude. But look at the chains. They're not really strong. Like they're loose. Right? They can actually escape if they want to. There's nothing binding them to where they are. And that's the funny thing about Saturn. We very often have this perception or this idea of being limited by our circumstances, but actually it's just in our mind. It's like, well, I need this much money, or I need a partner that does this or looks this way, or I need people to treat me this way, or I need to have these kinds of experiences in life so that I always feel a certain way. We just create these parameters. We don't realize it. We don't realize the extent to which we are just conditioned. And so there's an underlying reality of shame and blame and judgment that happens with Saturn, where we will often look at the world unconsciously as an out-picturing, as a projection of our internalized judgments. Like, oh, everyone's looking at me because I didn't shave and no one cares. Or everyone's going to be embarrassed because this, and, I'm going to be embarrassed. Everyone's going to see me. Or going on the job and having all these ideas of how you're supposed to act, how you're supposed to behave. And we all experience this in our own lives in some way or another. The sensitivity to judgment, the sensitivity to, if I act a certain way or people saw me for who I actually was, I would be shamed, I would be judged. And what's the biggest fear within Saturn? If Saturn's all about alignment, which is a way of basically participating in this human experience, the biggest fear within Saturn is you don't deserve to participate. It's deeply traumatizing, right? That's the deep fear of judgment. It's basically this, scarlet letter, this way of being seen, this way of being known, this way of being revealed that basically says, oh yeah, you're a bad person, which translates to you're fired from this job. You don't belong in this family. You don't belong in this community. It's like Saturn is so much about belonging, not an Aquarius sense of like community and tribal belonging and resonance, or not in a Cancer sense either in terms of, every baby is held, but it's belonging in the sense that everyone here has a life. Everyone here has a role to play. Everyone has a job to do. If you're a parent, if you're a teacher, whatever it is, and we all have responsibility, and those responsibilities are very imminent. It's like we all are responsible for our bodies. We're all responsible to learn how to navigate relationships responsibly and consciously. Whatever our work, wherever Saturn is in our chart, 10th house, Capricorn, these are the areas of natural responsibility. And if we don't uphold those responsibilities, or if we are afraid of being judged for not doing them a certain way, or being or looking, appearing a certain way, then we have this deep fear of not belonging here, of being wrong, being bad. And so we can live a very tortured life within the Saturn archetype. And coming back to the devil symbology, we will often just associate values that say, this is who you're supposed to be, this is how you're supposed to act, this is how you're supposed to behave, and we enslave ourselves to that. We enslave ourselves to these limitations that we create in our own minds. And life has really no option but to reflect it back to us, right? It's just so perfect in that way. If we believe it's inappropriate to ask for what we need, then life will have no option but to effortlessly reflect back to us why, in fact, it is wrong and dangerous to ask for what we need. That's the Saturn conditioning, that we're always going to find a proof. If we go back in our history and our memory, and we look into how did I get to where I am right now, we're going to find proof that says, yeah, because if I act differently, or if I behave differently, if I'm not what I am, life judges me, life punishes me, it's harsh, it's unfriendly. And so when you start to unravel that, when any of us come to terms with our own harshness and the ways that we are holding shame and blame unto our own selves, and we begin to unravel how we have projected authority on the outside to judge and shame us, that's when the Saturn healing begins. And the Saturn healing is a slow and thorough and deep and delicate process. Because when you're looking at shame, the very nature of the unraveling is you can't just force a new ego structure. You can't just force new thoughts, new conditioning patterns. You have to be very careful and gentle with the unraveling of the old ones. I'm in this process right now with my friend who I'm having a child with. And it's one of those situations where, well, you know, Saturn and Pluto are on my 5th house cusp. Baby. Birthing. And so this is my own evolutionary imperative right now, and this is what's happening in my own life. And in not escaping and not running away, we're both needing to work out our own deeply internalized conditioning and self-shame and judgments. And it's not comfortable. But the wisdom in that is, oh, and we have to be really gentle. We got to see a counselor. We got to incorporate practices and tools. And it's the same thing that you do with a child. To develop healthy conditioning patterns, you develop habits, you create tools, practices, routines, you create a system that allows for a deconditioning to happen. I'm going to share my screen. I'm going to point one thing else before I go into the transits, just to really introduce this energy and really what's happening right now. The nature of the times that we're living in. It's such that we are all being called to do whatever is necessary to come into internal alignment with respect to the work that is in front of us right now. And it can feel like life is dangerous and scary and that we're being punished and old ideas or beliefs of karma and all those kinds of things. It can feel like life is heavy and dreary. And those feelings are so often only the signpost that we're healing a deeply ingrained and internalized pattern of seeing the world as unsafe, as unfriendly. And truthfully, most of us in some way have that perception. Most of us in some way at some point fall into the life is not safe here. And I have a reason to believe it. I have proof to believe it. It is harsh. I have to fight. And so I'm sitting in my van somewhere in Northern California off the highway, just sitting with the door open, looking at this open field, which you'll see the open field in a moment. But I actually wasn't looking at the open field. I was kind of staring down in my head. And I didn't realize it, but I was like looking straight at this warning sign. And I saw, I'm like, great. I'm just staring at warning. It's like warning me that I'm getting into danger, that horrible things are about to happen. I should be really careful. So I don't even know what to think about it. And started getting really, just really scared and just really dread. You know what a Saturn keyword is? Saturn Capricorn keyword is depression, heavy, but there's a word I'm looking for. It's like the drudgery of life. You know, it's not the word, but it'll come. But then in a moment, I looked up and I noticed that right in front of me was this beautiful tree. And immediately I got a teaching from that. And the teaching that I received, futility, thank you, Linda. That is the word spoken by a true Capricorn who does amazing work in this world. Beautiful. Yeah, futility. I looked up at this tree and I immediately got this teaching, which is beyond the warning, beyond the signs of life that's asking you to be conscious and careful and aware, is life. Life. So we have this tree here, and I just sat there admiring it, opening my heart, and it was one of those experiences where I just knew that this tree was like there, conscious of me, and that we were having a moment together. And it was just so beautiful to feel the tree, to feel the love of this tree, and to have this intimate connection. And then I returned to the warning sign, and I was like, what is it warning me about? Right? So that curiosity came in. It's like, what's it warning me about? Oh. Oh. And I don't know if you can see it, actually. The lettering is really small, but it says here, before digging, trenching, or pushing, it says, warning, telephone pipe buried here. Before digging or trenching or pushing pipe, call this phone number. After weekends or holiday, call this number. And my heart just opened up, and I was like, wow, that's so compassionate. Right? We got a telephone wire, which has a great purpose, and it's being buried. And this warning sign is there to let you know there's a telephone wire, and that if you need to call for support, here's a number to call. And if it's the weekend, here's another number. And we got these perfect barbed wires so you don't walk over into the area beyond it, which I think was actually a nature preserve. And I just really got this beautiful teaching that warning, the boundaries, the parameters, the all the different ways in which we have ways of communicating. Stop here. What it's really doing, its purpose, is to protect and care for the sacred and that which is worthy of caring for. And when we only focus on the boundaries, on the form, on the parameters that are created to protect life, then we become depressed. Life becomes futile because it's just a bunch of rules, just a bunch of restrictions that we have to live by, but there's no living. So if we don't understand the reason for the boundaries, if we don't understand the reason for the parameters and the rules, then we don't have any wisdom. And we live a restricted life, or unbeknownst to us, we're in our own slavery. And then we become enslaved to the god of materialism. Like, I can't cross these boundaries ever again. I can't ever act this way. And, there's no rule in life that is ever meant to be forever. Every rule is conditional. There's not one rule that isn't conditional. Because rules aren't the foundation of existence. It's not what this is all about. And one of the biggest mistakes we make on this journey is where we put love as secondary to form. We put structure before structureless. So at this point, I want to introduce the current transits and speak about what's going on right now. So pretty much within a week, let me pull this up. Saturn is stationing direct. On September 17th or 18th, give or take. Saturn stations direct at 13 degrees Capricorn. And that's it, folks. That's the beginning. In my last EA Zoom meeting, I talked a lot about Jupiter stationing direct, going straight into Capricorn, and Jupiter and Saturn will be crossing each other a few times. But this Saturn movement is really significant. So to be really clear, when we look at the transit of Saturn, we're looking at any moment in time where consciousness is needing to create definition and understand the relevance and the importance of building strength in the container, and thus the necessary boundaries and limitations for whatever is relevant on the soul's evolutionary journey at that moment in time. Saturn requires a great quality of work in terms of introspection and self-knowledge. That self-knowledge basically says, how are you going to make this work? How are you going to embody and consciously integrate the roles and the responsibilities and the work that is in front of you in life? And there's this like adulting thing that happens with Saturn. It could happen at any age in your life. But that adulting is, there's a certain tether that we all experience on our soul journey. And that tether can be really long. And it basically says there's a lot of karmic wiggle room. There's a lot of space here to play and run around, kind of operate on a certain level of immaturity, and not to be judging that, but just to operate on a certain level of immaturity in terms of there aren't big responsibilities, nothing motivating or pushing or requiring your presence or availability. At various stations, and it's really according to the soul's individual karma. What is planned for this lifetime? There's such a big part of this evolutionary journey that we have to understand. Life is set up for us. I keep on discovering this in my own direct experience on my journey. And the more I work with others, there's a deeply compassionate understanding that much of our life, the parameters of our life journey, is established with this birth. And we make choices within that. We set the stage for us to do the work, to grow within what is provided for us, and to become more self-aware, and to consciously create with our reality. But so much of this is planted. That's why you have Saturn cycles that basically say, you know, we enter different phases of life. We're going to work out different karmic dynamics. You know, Saturn returns one of them, Saturn squares another one. We work through these cycles and these phases of life, and they're just a part of the divine timing. And so we develop this self-knowledge and this introspection to really understand what it is we need to do, and to understand the limitations. And what can create a deep sense of futility when we acquiesce to the boundaries and the limitations of our life, and we sell our soul to it. When we don't consciously bring attention to how and what work do we need to do to build a healthy and aligned reality for ourselves. There's something incredibly positive that I have to say about Saturn, which is, if it's moving in your chart, it means you can do it. It means you're strong enough. Wherever Saturn is where you, Adam Ginsberg taught me this many years ago when I was studying with him. And I loved it. I was like, oh, that's a great line. Wherever Saturn is where you get stronger. Like that tree. It starts off delicate, but if you let it grow, if you tend to it, it gets stronger and stronger and stronger. And everything that we tend to consciously makes us stronger. But it's one of those pieces that we have to really fail. Realize, oh, that didn't work. Didn't work to speak that way. Didn't work to act that way. Try again. What do I need to integrate? So as Saturn's moving forward, it first moves over the south node of the moon. And that's not easy. Saturn's crossed the south node already. And that was a big part of what 2019 has been about. It crossed it twice. It basically stationed retrograde not far from it. Passed it. Actually, I'm confusing that. Whatever. It's crossed it twice before. It recently passed it in the past month or so. Now it's going to pass it again within the next months. And I'll show you actually when it will pass it again. At the very end of September. So you can consider Saturn stationing direct. It's sort of like the first event, which is, happening really soon within the next week or so. And then crossing over the south node being the next event. And the south node in Capricorn collectively speaks this period of time where we're healing karma around patriarchy, repression, where we are to integrate deep lessons that will support us to live in a healthy way. Cancer, where the emotional body can be cared for, where we can love one another, where we can care for one another, where we can live in a way where we're not repressing and hurting that which is sacred and natural. So it's a time to do your work. And don't worry, because after that, we have Saturn moving to Pluto. And this happens in January of 2020. And just look at that. All of those planets in Capricorn at between 21 and 23 degrees. That's a holy moly. It's a lot of planets. And just think about that. That's so much energy crystallizing around 22 degrees during Capricorn season itself. And this is what astrologers have been talking about for a long time. Saturn on Pluto. It's actually not going across Pluto again. That's the last time. The last time it crossed Pluto, by the way, was over 30 years ago in the early 80s. Those born 1982, 1983 have a Saturn-Pluto conjunction. This is the second time that we are having this. And so this time, it's actually only passing once. It happened earlier in this year as well. So this is the third time, actually, that Saturn is crossing Pluto. To really define the nature of this, Saturn on Pluto is about taking full responsibility to manage our shit, Pluto. Pluto teaches us about evolution and impermanence, and that the essence of this life is about evolving. And you have Saturn with Pluto and Capricorn. It's like being put in this very tight pressuring container. And that's where diamonds are created, right? Lots of pressure. But that pressure reflects basically a karmic situation where there's no longer any wiggle room. That tether has become shorter. And when that tether is shorter, we have two options. Show up, really find out what your work is, really do your work, which might not mean doing the work that other people tell you to do. It might not be the work that other people expect you to do, because the real Saturn work is you got to find your own inner compass and live according to your own inner authority and discipline yourself according to that. Otherwise, you're in that devil situation, you're enslaved. And the other choice is to resist, and the resistance is suffering. The resistance is immense suffering at this time. Because when we resist, when the tether is that short, karmically, we don't have a lot of space to go all around. Like, we don't have a lot of space to distract ourselves. And so the resistance creates more suffering. And in extreme situations, this can really create a psychology of intense futility and depression, a will to lose life, victimization. I mean, just the depression, the heaviness of this transit can be really intense. As it's stationing direct, Saturn stationing direct can be somewhat optimistic in the sense that, hey, you're getting the self-knowledge now, clarifying, you have the wisdom and the ability to act upon and integrate a lot of the work you've been doing over the past several months. But it also implies a certain expediency where it's time to do the work. And as it moves towards Pluto, it's like you have to be doing that work. Wherever Saturn is transiting in your chart, and wherever that Pluto is, around 22 degrees, think about what house is it in? Where's the ruler of that Capricorn house that it's in? What's the condition of your own Saturn? These are areas to understand in terms of where this responsibility and this karmic evolutionary necessity to show up and do our work is really manifesting right now. And there's something really important we need to understand about karma. We're not aware of it entirely. If we're really attuned, if we really have a keen vision, we can sort of play detective and look at our early conditioning and imprints that we received and sort of get okay, that right there, you're going to have to deal with that later on. We can sort of have that, and we look at a chart and even have that intuitive sense of okay, yeah, later in your life, you're going to manifest a situation where you're going to have to actually unravel that karmic piece, that imprinting that you received early on, which itself has a much deeper karmic reason. For me, my whole life, people told me you're gonna have a relationship at some point and do the whole family thing. For many years, I was pretty darn resistant to that. But over the past several years, I've been really excited about it. Nevertheless, the fact of what it brings up is something that I have to inevitably face on my own journey. And this could happen for us with a new position, a new opportunity in life, with a relationship, with family, with a death, with different things that bring changes or new responsibilities in our life, where it's like, okay, now I really have to deal with this. I really have to integrate this. So often this happens for people when someone dies, like when a close family member dies, because then they go through the relative stuff. They have to integrate, make plans, and deal with inheritance or the property or whatever, things like that. And it brings up core Saturn issues of belonging, right and wrong, things that were not maybe addressed when you were a child in your family, with your parents or with your sibling. Or when we get to a place where we have social power and we're the boss and we have people working for us or seeing many clients, there's a certain responsibility where we actually face certain aspects of our own consciousness that may not have come up prior. So life brings us into that place where it's time to look at it. Now, politically and collectively, this is volatile. It's difficult, to be completely honest. And look also as well, Chiron and Aries squaring the nodes, right? So that's going to be happening through 2020 as well, for several months. This is where people in power that are trying to hold on to that power will be obviously fighting harder to maintain authority. That's just sort of a given looking at these transits. But let's look beyond, because after it moves on to Pluto, Saturn literally goes straight into Aquarius. Don't celebrate yet though, but it moves direct in a week. And literally in that direct journey, it goes straight into Aquarius. That's pretty cool, right? Like it's already in Aquarius by May of 2020. So in this chart, we have Saturn stationing retrograde in Aquarius. Now, Aquarius relative to Capricorn symbolizes that which is unconditioned. And Saturn is conditioning. So the imperative with Saturn in Aquarius is to create a new form, to create a structural reality that reflects a higher consciousness that itself reflects the unconditioned nature of consciousness. Like Aquarius is community. It's a matrix of creative intelligence itself, that life exists as archetypes and energetics first, form within time and space second. And so Saturn Aquarius is bringing together you could say a movement, a revolution, a structural change in how we live on this planet by necessity. Saturn, karmic timing. It's like we have to think better now. We have to think differently. In the United States, I listened to the CNN climate crisis town hall with several of the Democratic candidates yesterday. And you can tell the difference between the candidates that really understood the imperative to act. It's like they understood the tether between how we're living and the reality of the climate is very short. That we can't just waste time. So there are those who got that, and there are those who didn't really get that. And those who got that were making really bold statements, things like, becoming 100% carbon free by the year 2030 or 2035. I mean, imagine everyone having an electric car or transferring and not buying any new gas cars, completely transitioning out of that within the next 10 or so years. That's an example of, okay, Saturn in Aquarius, doing that work to really think about how are we going to change the system to reflect where the world is going. And that Saturn work is, you don't just make these changes. The shadow with Saturn in Aquarius can very much be reacting from a sense of, I don't want to be enslaved, I don't want to be stuck, so screw the system, I'm just going to go off and do my own thing. But it never actually addresses the underlying cause, the underlying structural reality that's manifesting in the collective, that no matter how rebellious you are, you're going to have to get from point A to point B, and you're probably going to fly or use a plane or figure out some way to do it. But actually going from the core, and, you know, to quote Bernie Sanders, when many of people get in, I can't do it, get involved, lots of people get involved from the grassroots and demand change. That's when change happens on the top level. And we begin making structural changes in how we're living. So we create new Saturn policy with respect to the environment, Aquarius. So when these structural changes are happening, it's going to mean the tether starts. Like, you can't just be a child anymore. You're an adult now. It's like, oh, I have to shift these lifestyle ways. I have to shift these old patriarchal ways of separation, isolation, and repression. Because it's not just climate or economically, it's also socially and spiritually and emotionally. We have to heal the ways in which we've been isolating ourselves and hurting ourselves and repressing ourselves. Earnestly, we need to, in order to survive. If we can't break down these barriers that we've created of shame and separation amongst one another and within ourselves, then we won't have enough spaciousness to be able to really be there for one another and survive. Because to survive, it really means working together and coming together and thinking collectively what can work best for all of us. And so, after Saturn begins to go retrograde in Aquarius, it goes back to 25 degrees Capricorn at the very end of September in 2020. So that's the very end of that retrograde journey. And then it goes straight into Aquarius for good. But just look kind of like what the setup is here. Just before it ends that phase and it goes straight into Aquarius for good, it's only a few degrees from Pluto. Jupiter is going to be returning. Jupiter and Saturn are basically going to be entering Aquarius relatively within the same time frame. And so the end of 2020 is sort of like honestly, it feels to me like the grand finale of a television series. All that Capricorn energy culminating, and then look right here at the very beginning of 2021. I actually pulled up when Saturn reaches the same degree that it went retrograde in. It enters Aquarius in 2020, in December, I believe. And Jupiter just around then as well. And it'll be squaring Uranus. So I think a lot of the big Earth changes, Uranus and Taurus, Earth changes, Saturn in Aquarius, a structural change in how we're living here on this planet as a human species. I mean, that signature right there, Uranus squaring Saturn in Aquarius and the fixed signs of Taurus and Aquarius, like that's where I think we're going to start really seeing a lot of the bigger changes and the bigger shifts politically, like the bigger movements, right? And we're setting the stage for that right now. So, in all sincerity, I really dub the rest of it from the point of view of Saturn. I dub this whole cycle, pretty much all of 2020, but starting now, as the year plus of getting in alignment with why we are here. That's what it's about in my view. There are other things too. Thankfully, we have, the nodes in Gemini and Sagittarius squaring Neptune for its own nice journey of what the heck's going on in this, but also a lot of spiritual awareness and growth. So this concludes my formal talk on this topic, and I want to invite questions, and we can take a look at some charts and transits and anything that you want to speak to or share about.
This is so juicy. I'm so grateful. Thank you, Ari. I looked at these charts too. I've been looking at it, of course, because I have late Capricorn moon that's going to be impacted and all in my 8th house. So it's going to be quite a fun dance. Anyway. Yeah. I don't necessarily have any questions, but I really appreciate the overview and the constructs for reality that you're sharing with us. That's very helpful.
Thank you. Thank you. Great. Well, if there are no questions for today, I'm going to sing us a song, and then we'll call it at that. I'm going to grab my tambourine because it is. Tambourine. Not enough tambourines in general. So in lieu of the idea of futility, one of the most irritating things you can do in the presence of the consciousness of futility is to be joyful. And you don't want to fake joy, but there is such a profound power in understanding that joy is something that we can cultivate, that we can practice in our own lives by giving attention to, it's like the goal, right? It's like to know, okay, to really understand, okay, this is hard, it takes work, but to see the goal and to celebrate the fruits of what is working. Right? Oh, that worked. I did a good job, or that's bearing fruit, right? To really see the fruits of our efforts and to congratulate ourselves, to say, oh, you're doing it, you're doing a good job. So I'm going to sing a song that really resonates with that kind of energy. I actually don't know what song it is going to be yet, but that's what was coming, so let's just see. I'm going to make up a song. Yeah, I'm going to make up a song. Okay. Try your best. Let go of the rest. Try your best. Let go and go to rest. For you deserve to be loved. You deserve to be in peace. You deserve to enjoy your life. You deserve to know your worth. Breathe your love and trust in what you have done. Breathe your love and trust that your work is done. You deserve peace, and you deserve to rest, and you deserve to enjoy all the fruits of your work, the fruits of your work. Because everything that grows produces results, and every single result is something you can see, and everything you see reflects back to you the fruits of your work. And if you don't like the fruits, that is so okay. You don't have to eat all the fruits or plant those seeds at all. It's just an indication that those fruits aren't quite what you're going for. And so learn from that and start again, and please, with no shame, start again and trust this moment. Trust yourself, you are strong. And with that, I'll speak to one more piece on shame that came back that I've been thinking a lot about, as it's not just a gender thing. And Wendy, you made a really good point to me yesterday or today. but there is so much in terms of how we embody and relate to our emotions. And it's definitely true that men in general have been very conditioned, and it's a deep ancestral pattern to feel shame about their own vulnerability, their own emotions, and thus to not know how to express it. And then what's repressed becomes distorted. It's a Jeffrey Wolf Green quote. And so there's this really sweet and delicate process blossoming for us now. And I can speak for myself. For me, a lot of this has to do with tears and emotions and tenderness. And realizing how important it is that I am giving to myself as much safety and space as I need in the ways that I need it. Libra squared to Capricorn. We have to be able to really honor our own individual needs and not fit into something. And the importance of giving myself as much space and support that I need to really blossom and open up. And where we are repressing ourselves from shame, those are the exact places where we won't really be able to create healthy patterns. So I just want to offer this blessing for us all in this new phase as Saturn goes direct, that it's really a time where we can consciously see, very much direct language, consciously see and begin to understand and feel into, this is my work, this is the path in front of me. And to not just see our life in terms of the things that we need to do, but to get into the soft, delicate heart of it. To really get into, okay, what are my needs? What needs to be understood? What do I have to work on? What do I have to heal? What do I have to condition and form and bring tenderness and care and patience to? So we can be the adult caring for the child within us with immense patience and care and wisdom. Okay, so that concludes today's talk. Thank you all so much for joining me today.
Thank you so much, Ari Moshe. Unmuting everyone now to thank Ari Moshe.
Take the back road.
Thank you.
Thanks for that. We missed it. Okay, it's faster this way. We can save that for another time.
All right.
Yeah.
Bye,
Oh,
everyone.
no, there it is, Joshua Tree.